Imagine lying in a hospital bed, hoping for compassionate care from a nurse in a crisp white uniform. But instead of saving you, that nurse silently pushes you toward death. One syringe, one injection, and your life is ended without anyone suspecting a thing. This isn't fiction. This is the true story of Charles Cullen, the serial killer who hid behind the mask of an angel of mercy. For decades, hospitals have been seen as sacred places, places where dedicated professionals battle death every day to save lives. But Charles Cullen shattered that belief. A well-trained nurse, Cullen instead became a dark specter of terror for dozens of patients in hospitals across the northeastern United States. Charles Edmund Cullen was born in 1960 in New Jersey. His childhood was marked by tragedy. His father died when he was only 7 months old, and his mother was killed in a car accident when he was 17. This early trauma left him lonely, scarred, and deeply unstable. He attempted suicide multiple times and failed, then turned to another form of power, the power to decide who lives and who dies. In 1987, Charles Cullen officially began working as a nurse at St. Barnabas Medical Center, the place where his string of horrifying crimes began. With his medical knowledge, Cullen understood perfectly how to use medications, calculate lethal doses, and manipulate physiology so that death would look natural. He chose digoxin, insulin, sedatives, drugs that were extremely hard to trace without advanced testing. In the beginning, most of Cullen's victims were extremely ill or near death anyway, which meant no one really questioned their sudden passing. That gave him the perfect cover. Whenever suspicions began to circle, Cullen would simply resign and move on to another hospital. A serial killer hiding in plain sight, aided by a healthcare system that unknowingly protected him. No one imagined that a caring, gentle nurse could turn into a monster. Every day, he calmly went to work, giving injections, taking vital signs, tending to patients. And then, in the quiet of night, he would pull out his lethal syringe and snuff out lives without hesitation. What's even chilling is that Charles Cullen felt no remorse. In his twisted mind, he believed he was granting mercy, releasing people from suffering. But the truth was much darker. He was addicted to the feeling of absolute power, deciding who lived and who died. To the people around him, Charles Cullen appeared to be a guardian angel. His colleagues praised his dedication, and patients placed their trust in him without hesitation. No one could see the darkness buried deep inside. No one suspected the deadly urges beneath his calm, soft-spoken demeanor. Throughout the 1990s, Charles Cullen kept jumping from hospital to hospital, at least 9 in New Jersey and Pennsylvania. And in each new place, he repeated the same pattern, slipping a deadly dose into a patient's IV and leaving before anyone could connect the dots. If a hospital noticed missing drugs or suspicious deaths, Cullen would simply resign and disappear. Hospital administrators, terrified of lawsuits and scandal, quietly let him go without alerting the police. This allowed Charles Cullen to expand his victim count undetected. No one knows exactly how many lives he stole. He admitted to about 40 victims, but investigators believe the true number could be over 400, making him one of the deadliest serial killers in American history. Each time he killed, he wore a calm, almost serene expression. He'd finish his routine care, then inject the drug, and calmly watch as the patient's heart slowed, like a god deciding their fate. No one spoke up. No one dared accuse him. A broken, poorly regulated healthcare system gave Cullen the perfect hiding place, and he kept smiling, kept wearing that angelic white uniform as he spread death in silence. An angel in white, carrying a syringe of death. He wandered the hospital hallways, smiling politely at patients' families, only to have those fragile lives slip away just hours later. Even more terrifying, he would return for the next shift as if nothing had happened. Many people still wonder how Charles Cullen managed to get away with murder for so many years. The answer lies in a mix of complacency and, in some cases, cowardice from the hospitals and the colleagues around him. At the time, many hospitals in America were struggling with severe nurse shortages. A nurse like Cullen, experienced, willing to work night shifts, ready to handle difficult patients, and always seemingly calm and dependable, was considered a valuable asset. So when any suspicious patterns showed up, missing drugs, unusual medication orders, altered records, administrators preferred to handle things quietly to avoid bad publicity, rather than involve law enforcement. That is exactly how Cullen moved so freely from one facility to the next. He later admitted that whenever anyone started to question him, he would just resign and apply somewhere else, and no one ever stopped him. Back then, there was no national background check or centralized database to flag dangerous healthcare workers. And in that terrifying loophole, a serial killer found room to thrive. At St. Luke's Hospital, Charles Cullen repeated the same twisted pattern. He targeted the frail, the elderly, the vulnerable, patients who would not draw much attention if they died. He would slip digoxin or insulin into their IV lines, quietly shutting down their hearts. Even more disturbing, Cullen never raised his voice, never argued with coworkers, never lost his cool. He was always calm, polite, and helpful. The ideal nurse, someone others trusted without question. The horror of Cullen's crimes is amplified by the fact that he genuinely saw himself as merciful. In his warped mind, ending these lives was a way of freeing them from suffering. But no one asked him to intervene. No family consented to their loved one being euthanized. Cullen took that power for himself, a dark god deciding who deserved to live or die. As time went on, Cullen grew bolder. He stopped limiting himself to patients who were already near death. One middle-aged man, recovering from a blood infection, expected to go home soon, suddenly died after Cullen secretly injected a massive insulin dose into his IV. Another woman, days from being discharged, went into cardiac arrest without warning. He was hooked on the rush of power, the ultimate power of controlling a person's life with the push of a plunger. When detectives finally interviewed him later, Cullen described watching patients fade away as a relief. It was a horrifying glimpse into the mind of a man whose empathy had been warped beyond recognition. Everything began to unravel in 2003. At Somerset Medical Center in New Jersey, where Cullen was working night shifts as usual, a pharmacist named Amy Loughran, a coworker of Cullen's, noticed that the hospital's supply of digoxin was mysteriously running low. She started to quietly track medication charts and cross-check death records. Again and again, she saw Cullen's name attached to sudden, unexplained patient deaths. At first, Amy refused to believe it. Cullen had always been kind to her, helping with tough patients, picking up extra shifts. But the numbers didn't lie. Whenever Cullen was on the floor, the death rate spiked dramatically. After several sleepless nights, Amy decided she had no choice but to go to the police. Law enforcement in New Jersey was already investigating strange deaths at Somerset, so they teamed up with Amy to monitor Cullen. They asked her to wear a wire and talk to him, hoping he might slip up and confess. Those conversations between Amy and Cullen were chilling. One moment, they talked about normal hospital gossip. The next, Amy would steer the conversation toward missing drugs or suspicious deaths. Sitting across from her, Cullen looked as calm and friendly as ever, never suspecting that Amy was helping police build the case that would destroy him. Finally, in December 2003, Charles Cullen was arrested. He accepted the handcuffs with a weird calm, almost as if he had been expecting it. When questioned, he confessed without much resistance. He had killed more than 30 patients, but couldn't remember the exact number because there were too many. The shockwave that rippled through the country was overwhelming. A nurse, someone people trusted with their lives, had been murdering patients for over 16 years without anyone stopping him. Families of the victims were devastated, demanding justice. Hospital executives had to face shame and outrage, forced to admit they'd let a killer move freely through their facilities for years. When a white medical uniform becomes the perfect disguise, when syringes turn from tools of healing into weapons of death, and when an entire hospital system is fooled for 16 years, that is the darkest tragedy the medical profession has ever seen. After Charles Cullen's arrest, the interrogation was long, methodical, and deeply disturbing. Investigators listened as he calmly recounted his murders, showing no emotion, no regret. He listed the names of drugs, described the doses, even explained which types of patients were least likely to raise suspicion. His confessions made detectives shudder, not because of graphic details, but because of how cold and detached Cullen was. When prosecutors asked if he felt remorse, Cullen repeated, almost robotically, that he was helping them escape their pain. But no one had ever asked him to play God. No one had given him permission to make that choice. Many of the victims' families were shattered by his words. They demanded the harshest possible punishment and wanted the world to know exactly what Cullen had done. But the sad truth was that many of Cullen's victims had already been cremated or had died so long ago that their remains could not be exhumed for testing. As a result, prosecutors could only bring charges for about 40 murders, where enough medical records or evidence had survived to build a case. In 2006, Charles Cullen was sentenced to 11 consecutive life sentences with no possibility of parole. He will spend the rest of his days behind bars, never to set foot outside prison walls again. For the families of his victims, it was a small measure of peace, though the emotional wounds may never truly heal. The Charles Cullen case became a massive wake-up call for the entire U.S. healthcare system. In its aftermath, a series of reforms were introduced. Mandatory reporting systems between hospitals to flag suspicious employees and prevent them from moving around undetected. Much stricter monitoring of high-risk medications like digoxin and insulin. Nationwide background checks and a consolidated employment history database for nurses and medical staff crossing state lines. All of these changes came at a terrible price, paid for in the lives of dozens, maybe even hundreds of innocent patients who trusted their caregivers. Charles Cullen wasn't a traditional bloodthirsty killer. He was cold, methodical, intelligent, using the trust of the medical profession as a perfect shield. He knew exactly how hospitals operated, how medication was managed, and how administrators were terrified of lawsuits. He exploited every single weakness. The greatest horror is that many families will never know for certain if their loved ones were among Cullen's victims. At the final moments of their lives, patients had no clue that the nurse injecting them was the very embodiment of death itself. After his conviction, Cullen became the subject of intense study by criminologists and psychiatrists. Experts examined his traumatic childhood, his failed suicide attempts, his lifelong sense of isolation, and the deep mental scars that shaped his twisted ideas of mercy. But no amount of academic analysis can erase the hard truth. He stole countless lives without a second thought. So, what is the lesson here? Never place blind trust in anyone, no matter how respectable their uniform may look. Institutions, especially hospitals, must build strong systems for oversight, transparency, and accountability. And above all, each of us has a duty to speak up if we see something wrong. Silence is not neutral. Silence can kill. Charles Cullen's story is a terrifying reminder that evil can hide anywhere, even in the halls of healing, that a gentle smile can sometimes mask a killer's intentions. If this story shocked you or opened your eyes, please share this video so others can learn from it too. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button and turn on the notification bell so you won't miss more real-life crime stories just like this one. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next one.